and welcome on Radio Kajou. This is a pleasure for me, and it might be a privilege for you to be part of this conversation. A conversation that we're having at the moment very critical in our lives. We are at the eve of the elections in the US, but besides these elections, at the top of the ticket to send a couple of new leaders or old leaders in Washington, we also have an opportunity to dig deep within our lives through the Constitution. I was having a conversation with my dear friend, Dr. Mark Rogers, and he pinpointed a situation where women in the US are not protected by the Constitution. I was dumbstruck, I was astonished to hear that in number one country in the world, women are not protected. Dr. Mark Rogers is from Florida. He went to school in Florida, and also he traveled to study in Pennsylvania at Wharton University, and he worked in corporate America before he became a medical doctor. But today, he will not be talking about his practice, but also have to mention that his father, Theo, has left Nazi Germany before migrating to the US. And I can't wait to have a full, complete story between Dr. Rogers and his dad and so forth. But today, we will start first by why these elections matter. And this is a pleasure for me to introduce to you my friend, Dr. Mark Rogers. Welcome here, Mark.
Hey, Roosevelt. It's great to see you on the screen. I'm really honored to be on your show. Thank you so much.
Thank you. The pleasure is for me. We go right to it. The elections will be coming in 2 weeks, in 1 week right here. Why these elections matter, why they are so important.
Well, this election in particular, the last two elections, people contend with getting their information from Instagram and YouTube and Twitter X. When we came up, we had real journalists to tell us what was really going on, and now it's just on their phone 10 seconds, and they're just so confused as to what's true and what's not. And a lot of people are saying, you know what, I'm just not going to vote. And what I'd like to start off is by saying that a vote is like a prayer. It's free and it's private. And you don't expect God to fix everything the next, but you're heard. You hope that something positive happens. You hope enough people pray that your message gets heard. And that's what a vote is like. And so I just hope the number one thing is that people realize there's a lot of important issues in this particular election, especially around women's freedom and women's protection, and that they think about the issues and make a prayer.
I totally agree with you, and I like that analogy to, yes, you pray, but you don't. This is like you sow a seed, but you cannot know exactly what you will be reaping, and but something special is the place of women in the U.S. Constitution. You told me that women are not protected. I can't believe it.
Yeah, I mean, when my daughter explained that to me, my daughter Roosevelt, and for your listeners that don't know, is a highly skilled lawyer with experience from the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. and the Legal Defense Fund. She's worked at the Legal Defense Fund, which is a primal rights organization. And she told me in 2010, and she told me in 2017, and a couple days ago she was explaining it to me again. And it's finally really sticking, and I'm excited to share it with people. The U.S. Constitution guarantees protection against discrimination by race and religion, but not by sex or gender. there's the whole way to understand the shock of it is to understand the difference between laws, statutes, and acts versus the Constitution, which is the Bill of Rights, the Articles, and the Amendments. And if a right is guaranteed in a law or act, like most of the women's rights are, they can be challenged through the court system. The Supreme Court can change those decisions. The president can write an executive order against those rights. That's part of the checks and balances of our country, and that's what makes our country great. But having a right guaranteed in the Constitution takes the president out of it. The president can't write an executive order against it, and he can't change federal judges like was done in 2020 and eventually have the Supreme Court remove those acts, remove those laws, and make women vulnerable. So getting women's rights guaranteed in the Constitution is of utmost importance. And this election in particular can help move that forward. But there's a lot of important work to be done. Hopefully we can talk more today in this discussion about how to make that happen.
So first, let's understand. I remember history. I remember Abigail Adams, the first lady of our second president of the U.S., writing in the letters, writing asking for women to be more present. So what is the history? Can you walk us through women and power and elections before we talk about specifics?
Sure. That's a great idea. I'll try and do it quick, and then we can come back if I went too quick. And we'll get to what the Equal Rights Amendment is, which that's the amendment that we have to get passed in order to protect our moms and our grandmoms and our aunties and our sisters and all those important women in our lives that we depend on. And frankly, we wouldn't be here if it wasn't for a woman, right? So,
of course.
As you said, Abigail, her husband John, had said, you got to include the ladies in the Constitution. He wrote back, and you can look up the letters, we can't do that. We appreciate our women, but the guys aren't going to the women specifically Constitution. Neither were there was a lot of people left out of the Constitution originally. Eventually, we came to World War One. A couple hundred years later, let's see, 1790, 120 years later, and women were a key part of winning World War One because they went to the factories and they made everything that the men were making, but are now fighting in World War One. So they came back after the war and said, we want our rights, you out of the Constitution. And that's when the 19th Amendment got passed, which guaranteed the woman's right to vote. But it didn't give them equal protection in all other matters, in business, in education, in financial issues. It was just for. And then there were amendments that was like the 15th Amendment, which granted the voting right should be protected based color, and it didn't matter if you were a slave or not in the country. But again, it didn't give women any particular protection in anything except voting. And that brought us from 1920, 1970, when we had a Supreme Court decision called Roe versus Wade. And that decision protected women to decide with their doctors what they would do if they were faced with a medical emergency while they were pregnant, or if they wanted to terminate a pregnancy for any number of reasons, which could have been, a medical reason or other reasons which people talk about. But that right to decide what to do with your doctor and your family, to have family around, that wasn't in the Constitution. That was through a precedent set by the Supreme Court in the 70s. So recently, hopefully the listeners are aware that the previous Republican president, President Trump, he changed a lot of judges in the federal system, and he appointed 3 new judges to the Supreme Court, and they heard a case called Dobbs, and they decided 2 years ago to strike down that Roe versus Wade case. So they proudly, and if you listen and look on the internet, you will see they proudly said that they struck down, they were the reason how it came to be that Roe versus Wade was struck down. And they're proud that it's back in the state courts. But that means we have 50 different laws. And people right now who are in Texas can't get help for an abortion, or Florida for that matter. And there have been people in Florida and Texas that have died because their doctor told them the pregnancy needed to be terminated or you're not going to survive your delivery. And you know, back in the day, 1700s, 1500s, women died all the time in labor. I mean, that was a common occurrence. It wasn't rare. It happened. It was a real risk. If you were pregnant and you were going to deliver, that was a major event in your life. I mean, with modern medicine, we sort of think, all women are going to get through their pregnancy, but it still doesn't happen. And there are times when doctors say, your baby's not living anymore, or they're very ill and they're going to die 8 weeks after you deliver. And we think you have a 70-80% chance of not surviving. And if we
So
can
that is a that is a very critical issue. Now, where are we?
So right now, depending on what state you live in, you may or may not have the right to decide what to do in a dangerous pregnancy. Or for that matter, at any stage of your pregnancy. If you happen to live in the Northeast, there's many states that have rushed to pass laws and statutes to protect the woman's right to decide what she wants to do with her own body and her own child. As I said, in Texas and Florida, the laws have been passed to highly restrict or totally restrict a woman's right to decide. And even those laws up in Massachusetts or New York or New Jersey, those can be challenged again because it's not in the Constitution. And that's what I want to draw everyone's attention to, is there's something called the Equal Rights Amendment. And that needs to get passed so that women and you cannot be discriminated against by sex or gender, period. And once that's in the Constitution, then women, people of any gender, are completely protected.
So did we have some initiatives, law initiatives from either the House of Representatives to send it to the Senate, then for the president to sign it into law for ERA? Where are we with ERA, which is this Equal Rights Amendment we're talking about?
Right. Well, the history of the ERA really started in the 1970s, and it is a little rocky and hard to understand, but I think I can summarize it saying that first the House of Representatives has to propose it and pass it, then the Senate has to approve it, and 3 out of 4 states in the United States ratify an amendment to the Constitution. And there was a deadline placed on that originally in the 70s. It was then extended to the 80s, and there were all the states that have Democratic governors passed it quickly and were ready to go, and that came to 25. And then there were 10 states that were Republican governors, and some of those passed it, and then some of those rescinded, and they wound up going past the deadline through those delays. And the most recent thing that I've read about is that in 2023, the final 5 states that we needed to have ratify the amendment, they did ratify it, and the House of Representatives wrote a bill that the deadline should be extended a second time. And the Republicans in the Senate last year delayed, said, no, we're not going to pass that. We're not going to extend the deadline, even though we have 3 out of 4 states now, all the Democratic governors, and more than 12 Republican governors that said, yes, we ratified it. We want women to have equal protection. We want no discrimination by sex or gender. And the Republican senators would not enough Republican senators voted with all the Democratic senators, and that wasn't enough. You need 60 senators to say, yes, we'll extend the deadline. It's complicated. People talk about, well, we don't know if it's legal to extend a deadline. But you're right, in the 1982, and the point is, if you believe in protecting women, if you believe in protecting your grandmother and your auntie, then go ahead and extend the deadline. Go ahead and pass it, and let someone challenge it. Let the Supreme Court then say, no, we'll reverse that.
The
it wasn't legal.
Does not ratify it. That will be something else. If for a reason those 60, I said, if those 60 senators vote it into law, the president has to sign it, then the Supreme Court can challenge it.
No.
That's what I get.
No, okay. The president didn't have to sign it. No.
Okay.
Just the Senate needed to approve that bill, that it was extended, and that's it. It's then part of the Constitution. Then the president, if he wants to object to it, he has to find a case and bring it back up through the legal system and ask the Supreme Court if it was legal in 1982 and in 2024 to extend the deadline. But in the meantime, women have protection, and we have a shot at keeping them protected. And you roll with the punches at that point.
My conversation today with Dr. Mark Rogers, we started this conversation saying elections is like a prayer. You pray and you wish that the best is yet to come. We're also having, beyond the elections for the president, for the senators and House representatives, there are some amendments that are very important to us. And today we talked about equal rights amendment, and specifically for women. And he mentioned, since the inception of our country, since the beginning, the second president, amazing First Lady Abigail, has to write to her husband saying, don't forget the women. They can start a rebellion. I remember I read that letter from Abigail. And also we had a second First Lady, Eleanor Roosevelt, who was also very proactive for women's rights. Now we know what to do, what we the people can do. As the people, we start here with information. That means we know about the topic, we know about the issue. But what can we do, Dr. Rogers?
Well, for one thing, you can write letters to all your senators, and if you have time, your representatives also, but at least your senators, whether they're Republican or Democrat. And you can start with your own state, because there's only 2 of them, and then you can write some letters to other states, and you can tell them how important it is to you as a registered voter, that you want the women in your life and the women who are yet to be born to your life to be completely protected, like people are protected against by race and religion. So write those letters regardless of the election. I told you that it was the Republican Senate that decided not to go the extra yard and pass and accept the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment. They could have, even if they believed that it went long enough, they could have still done it and they could have moved the ball forward. And then it would have just been a technicality to have to perhaps restart the process and do a new law with a new deadline and just redo it quickly. But they find power in delaying, they find power in denying. Let me just quickly give you some more examples of the women that are at risk. I didn't realize this. Would you believe that women could not get credit until 1974, and there's an Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974 that allowed credit cards? That's another example that if the Republican Senate gets away with this, in the next 4 or 8 years, they could go and challenge the Equal Credit Opportunity Act and say that it's, come up with some reason to nullify it, just like they did Roe versus Wade. Women's right to have business loans without a male co-signer only has been in 1988 under the Women Businessship Act, because they don't have protection in the Constitution that says they can't be discriminated. So Congress said, well, what we'll do is we'll pass an act that says women can own businesses on their own. The women's right to cross state line. This is important because let's say a woman, there was a woman that died in Florida because she needed to get an abortion in her late month and she didn't. Her parents tried and she wound up dying tragically. Her right to get in the airplane in Massachusetts or go to New York to get an abortion could be challenged. It's under the Freedom to Travel for Health bill, which was quickly passed by Democrats in 2023. They realized that Roe versus Wade was gone and dead.
Wow.
Bill could be challenged. In fact, it's a bill. It hasn't even been put into law yet. It's not even a law yet, Roosevelt. It's just a bill. It hasn't been passed yet. There's nothing in the Constitution that says a woman can get on an airplane, can get in a car, and drive to New York for an abortion. It's not guaranteed by the Constitution of this country on the planet. The Women's Right to College is codified under the Women's Educational Equity Act. That could be overturned through the court system. And then there's the last one example I'll give you is the WAWA Act, which is Violence Against Women Act of 1994, that recent. And that gives women some protection against marital rape. But can you believe, like, for instance, in South Carolina, which has a Republican government, Republican governor, the example I'll give you there is sexual battery by a male spouse gets 10 years imprisonment. But if the male is a stranger and not a spouse, they get 30 years.
Wow. So now, what I get from what you said, if the ERA, the Equal Rights Amendment, was passed to protect any sex or gender from any discrimination, all these examples that you just told us about, they could not be challenged by any president, neither any president nor the Supreme Court. Is that so?
Yeah, no court could challenge it successfully. The Supreme Court would have to say that the whole amendment is unconstitutional. Mm-hmm. which is a difficult argument to make. It could be made. For instance, let's say, because I'm not a constitutional lawyer, and even if you get 100 constitutional lawyers in a room, there's going to be at least 2 opinions, probably 100 opinions if there's 100 lawyers. And a lot of them will be highly educated and very progressive. But just an example, had the Republican Senate said, you know what, we're not sure about the legality of changing the deadline, technically speaking. I mean, in spirit, we're all for it. In spirit, we want our grandmothers protected. Let's go for it. And it's not like they're guessing. They have a lot of high-powered attorneys on their staffs. It's not like they don't have information to go by. But for sure, at least what I've read, it's not until the Supreme Court says it's okay. You never know. So they could have said,
So you
"Look,
and I,
it's a tie. Let's just do it."
go ahead. You and I, we are in Florida, so we may where we can have our influence. And for those who are listening to us right now in Florida, what is the situation in Florida
Right.
for the
I was gonna jump on that. I mean, Florida has not passed the ERA. Governor Ron DeSantis said to his legislature, we got to protect our aunties. And and it's not up to Ron DeSantis. It's on him to encourage and to campaign for. It's up to the House of Representatives in Florida and the Senate in Florida, those Florida elected officials, to pass it. But the governor plays a big role in that. The governor can't run again. I can maintain our power if we don't say our women, let's pass this. There are issues on both sides. There are concerns of people on both sides, and you care about the issues. But and let me address that in just a minute. But to answer your question, you can write letters, Senator, and you can write letters to Ron DeSantis and your local Congress people and tell them it's important to you and you want Florida to pass the ERA. Now, there's already 38 states that have passed it. There are enough. Of only 2 years ago, there was like a 5-10 year period where we were still 5 Republican governors short, but we have enough now. All the Republican Senate has to do is say, you know what, it's just as likely it's going to be upheld as it's not going to be upheld. Just do it, and let's see if anyone, if the President of the United States doesn't challenge it, if nobody successfully brings a lawsuit, even if it's 88% legal, not 100% legal, until someone challenges action. And that's a critical problem too. So what I was going to say, write to your senators, write both to your state senators and to your federal senators. I'm going to address the idea. I kind of lost my thought on that.
No, my question
maybe you have another
was.
question.
My question was, okay, we understand that that we are a two-party system, and the Republican, they are training their legs on this. But now, what about the Democrats?
Right.
Because once upon a time we have a president Democrat, we have the House of Representatives Democrat, we have the Senate Democrat. We could have done it back then.
That's right. So let's talk about Florida's history in particular, since it has not ratified the ERA, and that was the thought I had to address. So, in the 90s, we had a Democratic governor and we had a Democratic legislature for a brief number of years, not the entire 90s. And you would think that the Democrats, all the Democratic governors have approved it. You would think that that would have been something that could have been accomplished. But, Lawton Chiles and the Democratic realized that there was a large constituency in Florida that had their reservations. There were cultural issues that they put above the protection of all women and genders against discrimination. And they were sensitive to that, and they were accurate in that sensitivity, because if you look at our history, Lawton Childs eventually lost. The Republican, the Senate and the in Florida went heavily Republican, and that swept in Jeb Bush's terms and Rick Scott's terms and Ron DeSantis's terms, and support for Tea Party ideas and MAGA ideas. So the Democrats were very sensitive to the other constituents that were not Democrats in the state, and they decided not to push the issue. They thought that as long as women's rights were codified, protected in acts and laws, that the women were safe. And why push the issue and aggravate the other constituents? But as we saw a couple of years ago, laws and acts can be overturned by courts, and women can lose their rights to control their body. And they didn't take that chance back then. And there are issues on both sides. There are cultural things that people feel strongly about, maybe rooted in their religion, why they don't think there are some rights that women would be given that would go against their cultural beliefs. And I don't think we have time to discuss all that. But
That will be coming.
overall, think about this. There was a pastor in Germany after World War II that said, and he's been quoted many times, first they came for the socialists, and I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. And then they came for the trade unionists, and I didn't speak out because I was not a trade unionist. And then they came for the Jews, and I didn't speak out because I was not a Jew. But then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. So as you look at the issues, the cultural, the religious issues about whether to protect all genders and whether to protect all sexes, and you find one or two things that don't feel great, the overall effect. That if you don't stand up for half the population, for the people that put you on the earth, once they lose all their rights to credit cards, their rights to cross state lines, their right to own a business, and people they got away with doing that, they come after you. So even if you're a guy and you say that's the women's problem, I'm not married, I don't have others, don't go safe. All right, this country is all about, they use the word men, all men are created equal, but the spirit of this country is that all people are created equal. And that's how God looks at all people, and that's what the Constitution should reflect. And if you have specific cultural issues with the notion that somebody else has a right that might impinge on your beliefs, then deal with it. Deal with it other ways, deal with it through your private organizations and so on and so forth. But don't take away, don't say that, well, that small group over there should be treated differently, because as soon as you do that, the whole thing unravels.
And this is John Adams. This is John Adams who stated that democracy is power to the majority to protect the minority. Power to the majority, power from the majority to protect the minorities. So that means I totally agree. We need to come, and the call for action at the grassroots level is to put pressure on your senator to send letters, to make a phone call, and to be active on those issues. Because when we liberate everybody, liberty becomes global and bigger for all of us. So we started this conversation with Dr. Mark Rogers. Today we talked about the importance of the elections, and not only the elections for the elected officials, but also the amendments that protect our freedom and a segment from our population, women. We went back to the beginning of this country. We referred to the ladies, women that Abigail Adams talked about with her husband, that those women can at any time make a rebellion if masculine power wanted to dominate everyone. So thank you, Dr. McWodgers, to take your specific time, so your valuable time to pinpoint that conversation with us. And I can't wait to listen to your from your daughter, Alison, to tell us more about the constitutions and to continue that crusade for education to the people.
Roosevelt, if anybody has questions, they want more information, um, I'm I'm not a lawyer. I'm not an expert. I think Allison could address those if people go to her website, uh, rogerslawpractice.com, and fill out a web form with their question. I'm sure she'll respond and give them information they could read, where they could learn more, how they could become more active other than just writing a letter. So I think that could be a valuable resource, rogerslawpractice.com. Anybody out there, someone could be listening saying, I know a way to make a difference. How can I make that happen? Talk to Allison and she'll figure out how you could do that.
Thank you, Dr. Rogers, and thank you to as well to our back office, to Renaldo Louis, who really facilitates this conversation on Radio Kajou today. Have a good day.
Hey, thanks a lot, Roosevelt. Appreciate the opportunity to spread the word.